One of the things I like to do in this class is take something that's kind of a topic, a big topic of conversation, really hitting the news, and knowing that, once again, most people aren't really taking the time to pay attention to it because you're busy doing other things. So I'm going to just give you like the Dr. Seuss version of it, or like the really simplistic version of it, and explain why it is that I think it really is big. And one of the things that we're seeing are these viruses that are really, really strong and mutating in some very profound and powerful ways. There are a handful of these, what are called RNA viruses, and these are viruses that human beings can get and other species can get. And some of them can pass between species, and this one certainly can pass between animals and human beings. And so one thing that we're seeing is that you bring lots of species together. Lots of species have viruses, and they carry viruses, and then they start passing them back and forth, and all sorts of really intense things happen. This particular one is one of many, and it has emerged fairly quickly, and it can have an incubation period of 1 to 14 days. And this isn't new, right? We see lots and lots of viruses in the world. And we see flu epidemics in the world that are just profound. There was a flu epidemic in the turn of the 20th century, like going from at the beginning of the 20th century, in the world that killed between 20 and 40 million people. The population of the world was much smaller, but this epidemic, this flu, killed about 5% of India, as an example. And we see flu, people die from flu all the time. You get a flu. Every flu season in the United States, people die from flus because they turn into these infections that really kill people. The flu isn't what kills people, but it's these other infections that kill people. So this one, for example, produces some kind of upper respiratory infection. It's not the virus itself, it's everything that comes out of that. And so people are getting it, and people are having these body breakdowns. The problem is, it can stay in the system for 1 to 14 days without ever really emerging itself, without even showing the symptoms. And so in that, what's being discussed right now, and what's being discovered is, at what point in those 1 to 14 days can people pass this virus along to other people? Meaning, like, I could have the virus and I could start passing that around to other folks, but without having any idea that I'm doing so. And that could happen for, 10, 12, 13 days. And I've been passing this all over the place. This virus will turn into an upper respiratory infection. So for most people, like those of us in this room who are young and healthy and have access to decent medical care, it's not going to kill us. We're mostly going to be fine. But if we're elderly, if we have other infirmities, if we have other issues that are happening in our lives, it's going to be a real problem. The world is starting to shut down because this thing could just take off so fast that no one can really catch it. And so we're starting to shut down. Pay attention to the news. China's closing its doors. The borders between Russia and China are closing up. Flights out of Wuhan. Wuhan, the city of 11 million people in China, is basically barricaded. You can't get out. There's a cruise ship right now sitting off the coast of Italy that is in quarantine because of 6,000 people on the cruise ship. One woman in this Chinese couple, the wife of this Chinese couple, has a high fever. And they have no idea in the process of this cruise how many people she may have affected. So the ship pulls into port. It is in quarantine. Nobody can get off. They pull her off. They're checking her out. And they're saying, look, nobody goes anywhere. For how long? For 14 days? Like, where do you go? So we're seeing quarantines all over the world. This is globalization. This is social 119, race and ethnic relations. We are moving around the world. We are making things happen, but it has detrimental consequences. countries around the world are testing people, and they're checking them to see what their temperature is, right? So we have all these machines, and we test them really fast. And if your temperature is, right now, it's like 99.2 is like the threshold that people are using. But the problem is 99.2. That means you have a fever. At any one time, 1% of the world's population has a fever of at least 99.2. If you're pregnant, you're going to have a fever the whole time. So they're pulling people off. They're picking them out, pulling people off, putting them in quarantine who may or may not have this virus. And they're putting them off in quarantine with other people who do have the virus, which could be the worst possible thing you could do, but we have no idea what to do, right? And so China in 2005 had 233 air routes to and from cities in China and cities around the world. And in 2005, 3 million travelers went in and out of China in those 233 air routes. These are routes, okay? In 2016, 739 air routes. China, we're going to talk about later, so I said China has exploded in every possible way. 50 million passengers went in and out of China. This isn't just, look at that radical transformation. This is big. How many people could have this virus and be sending it around the world? This thing, look, I'm not a doomsday person. I don't live in doomsday world because I've smoked way too much weed to live in doomsday world, right? It's just like, whatever, it's all good, doesn't matter. We'll work it out. I don't live in that world where the end of the world is coming, like, oh my God. I don't say that. I'm not part of it. But I'm a sociologist, and I'm watching this stuff, and I'm saying, whoa, for how we think about race relations and cultural relations in Mr. Rashidi in Afghanistan, in the Chinese government and the Russian government, in Colombia and Taiwan and Australia, and on and on and on. These things are really, really, really big. And so you don't know where it's going to go. This is what happens really fast. Within a month, right? We could get to the end of the semester, and like all of you who had ideas that we're going to travel somewhere, because my wife and I are going to South Korea in May. And like, it's all set. We have our tickets. There's speaking engagements all being lined up. We're moving forward. That may not happen. It just may be a lockdown. That's where this stuff really matters, and how we talk about it really matters. And the things that Mr. Rashidi was saying about really seeing the humanity in other people really comes into play. Because this is what it's about. And this is where it's like, pay attention and see what it is and what it means and how it operates. It's intense. Isn't that intense? Do y'all realize, look, this was the SARS virus. The SARS virus started in 2003. And, we kind of nipped it in the bud, and it was good, and we got it, and we took care of it. The SARS was the same kind of virus. But in 2003, there weren't a lot of people. And why China? Just because China. There are lots of, they say, well, it started at what's called a wet animal market, meaning this market in China where there are lots of animals from different species that come to be sold, and those animals come into contact with one another. Look, but I've been in those markets all over the world. They're not only in China, they're everywhere. And so, why China? Just because they happen to be China. But there are these viruses that are happening in Haiti. There are these viruses that are happening in Ecuador. There are viruses that are happening in Vietnam. It's all happening all over. But China's a different thing. China's big. And there's movement. And it's happening. And like, oh my God. And so, it's okay. It is what it is. It's going to unfold the way it unfolds. But it's unbelievably fascinating. And we might be living, you just never know, but we might be living in one of those times where you're like, oh my God, this was really, really, really big, and I didn't even know it. I wasn't even paying attention. And for me, teaching this class, there have always been a lot of things that kind of happen along the way, and I don't necessarily talk about them in the moment. And I thought, I got to talk about this. I want you to put your attention to this. This is really fascinating. And this could have a really big impact on our lives.